Hello, everybody. Welcome to this BB Dev Days 2025 session on Blackbaud CRM Page Designer Tips and Tricks. I wanted to start off with an apology to anyone who attempted to join the scheduled live broadcast of this session. We had a fairly major corruption of the event, and I was about 5 minutes in to the session before we realized that no one could see or hear me, and we weren't able to resolve that in time to deliver the session. Apologies for that. We've decided the best option was to record and then share the recording with everyone who was registered for that event. So hopefully you've now received this. My name is Gethin. I've recently joined Blackbaud as a solution architect in Blackbaud Europe, focusing on Blackbaud CRM. Prior to that, I was a Blackbaud customer for around 15 years, initially leading a team in the charity sector, running Razor's Edge 7, but for the last 7 years, leading a data function at University College London with a Blackbaud CRM instance. So I've spent a lot of time in Blackbaud CRM Page Designer, configuring it to support users, but I cannot take the credit for pulling together this session. That goes to my predecessor, Kelly Flanagan, who pulled this together and delivered it at a Blackbaud Europe CRM user group. It was such a great session. I was attending as a customer that when the call came out for BB Dev Day sessions, I readily volunteered to share this content with the wider BBCRM user group. I hope that it is of interest and value to you. Most of you are already somewhat familiar with the page designer function. It's an incredibly powerful tool to help you really get the maximum efficiency and value from your Blackbaud CRM instance. On the off chance that this is your first foray into Page Designer is accessed in the Cloud Omnibar. If you've got Blackbaud ID, it's in a similar spot if you're self-hosted, but you can click on that and that opens Page Designer. Once you can see these kind of blue boxes with the ability to edit tabs and do those kind of admin actions, you are in Page Designer. We're going to be working through 14 tips and tricks for maximizing usage out of Page Designer. Hopefully there will be something for everybody, even if you are a seasoned veteran of Page Designer, even if it's just reminding you that a particular functionality exists. We'll be looking at examples with some recorded videos, and also we'll have configuration instructions. The deck will be shared, so don't feel that you need to pause to write down some of those configuration instructions. They'll be grabbable from the PPTRX. I will also try to flag up some usage considerations as we go. Here are the 14 tips and tricks that we're going to be working through, and there may also even be some bonus tips along the way. You can see we've broadly categorized them in terms of beginner, intermediate, advanced, but it should be flagged that all of the Blackbaud CRM Page Designer elements that we're going to be looking at are available through the front end, so viable for anyone who has administrator access to your Blackbaud CRM instance. Number one is staying organized, and that's a reminder that within the management of the functional areas, which are the areas you click through when navigating through the top bar, those are your functional areas, and the things that make up those functional areas are tasks. There's a couple of exceptions to that. I think prospects is designed slightly differently, but most of the time you're looking at a functional area made up of tasks, and one of the things that you can do within those tasks is to group them into task groups, but you've also got the functionality to put folders within the task groups. So let's take a look at what that looks like in a short video. Here you can see the My Dashboards example is actually a folder, breaks through into a series of go-to page tasks. So we've removed some of the clutter from that parent functional area so that you can have a kind of a nice workflow and find the content that you need more quickly. If you do want to take advantage of folders, there are going to be 4 things that you need to be mindful of when you're doing the configuration of the task. The first is the folder field, and that is the name of the folder as it will appear on the functional area. So as you can see in the example we looked at, that was the My Dashboards. The folder task group is the task group on the functional area where you want that folder to sit. And the task group is a task group within the particular folder. So you can have nested task groups. If you're not using the folder functionality, so if you're just adding a task, task group would be referring to the number 2 so that you can have non-folder tasks appearing in the same task group as a folder. I hope that makes sense. The last one that you can also potentially use is folder image, and that gives you the folder image within the folder. Tip number 2 is about adding hyperlinks to user-defined constituencies. So as a quick refresher, your constituencies are the things that appear here on the constituent page. There are a number of automatic constituencies. So alumnus, donor, they automatically appear based on transactional data. When you add an educational history record, for example, the alumnus constituency will automatically appear, and you can click through on alumnus and it will take you through to the educational history record. You also have the ability to add user-defined constituencies representing business logic that's specific to your organization, and those will also appear up in the constituencies area, but by default they won't be hyperlinked to anywhere, they just appear as normal text. That does not need to be the end case. So if we have a quick look at this video here, you'll see an example where legacy pledger has been converted into a hyperlink. That is a user-defined constituency, and it's linking through to the prospect area. It may not always be the case that there's a natural home for a particular user-defined constituency that you've created, but if there is, it makes absolute sense that it should be a hyperlink as well. How do we go about doing this? We do it by adding a show page action to the constituent page. What you're going to want to do is create that action and use the following properties. So on the page, you're putting constituent page, tab, whichever tab is appropriate. The link field ID is the really critical one, and it needs to follow exactly this format. You can see constituency label is what you would replace with the label of your user-defined constituency. This can be used to point at an existing out-of-the-box tab, or it can also point to a configured tab that you've also created especially. So if your user-defined constituency is linked to an area that you've built out using the SDK, you can hyperlink to it in this way. Next, we've got another hyperlinking tip, and this one is about using hyperlinks on columns within a user-defined data list. An incredibly powerful tool to save your users having to click on the little chevron in the data list to access a range of actions. They can just click on the thing that feels natural and go to the place that they would want to go. Let's have a look at a quick video. Here's a user-defined data list. I click on the hyperlink and it takes me straight through to the interaction view form. To achieve this kind of linking, you'll need the same as you need for any show page action on a data list. You'll need to ensure that the ID of the record type or the record that you're wanting to link to is accessible within the data list. It can be hidden, so it doesn't need to clutter up the data list, but it needs to be available. And from there, you would go ahead and create the show page action. And then the key thing to add is in the field link field ID, you're going to put the column header for the field that you would like to appear as a hyperlink. It's worth noting that that does have to be case sensitive, so make sure you're copying it exactly. Staying in the world of data lists, The next tip we've got is around the display modes for data lists. It can be easy to forget that there's a lot more available here other than just the standard option. The standard option is obviously available, and that is the one that just looks like a classic table. But we also have 3 other options that I am going to run through quickly. The next option we're going to look at is grouped. Grouped is a really useful display option where you've got a data list of data that has a kind of a natural type that would be sensible to be collapsible by. If we have a look at the video of how it looks, you can see that it detects that type, groups the data in the data list, and users can easily collapse to kind of aid navigation through. Collapsibility isn't an all or nothing. You can collapse type by type. So in this particular screen, if I were to collapse accessibility, dietary restrictions would remain uncollapsed. The next display mode we're going to have a look at is the repeater display mode. This one takes or requires a view form to be defined for the data list, and rather than displaying a table as a typical data list does, it's going to show an instance of that view form repeated for every row that you would have had in the data list. Sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words. Let's take a look. Here is a research notes data list, and you can see what it's doing is repeating the view form for those different research notes. This is a particularly powerful display mode if you've put a lot of thought or effort into designing a view form where rather than just having all of the data display across in a line, the consumption of that, the user experience is helped by a particular type of layout. That's a great option for using a repeater data list. And last but certainly not least, we've got the relational data list display mode. This is probably the most complex display mode to take advantage of. It requires more setup in the data list. You'll need particular fields available, which I'll talk through in a second. But the end effect is this, where you've got nested relational structures that can be drilled through and sum upwards in the way that you see on screen. Like to take advantage of different display modes, you can do that in the style field of when creating a new data list. If you're using grouped, you'll need to define the column that should be used for that grouping. If you're choosing repeater, as we mentioned, you'll need to define which view form should be displayed and the header caption. And then if you're using relational, that one needs a little bit more work. You'll need to have 2 GUIDs for the record ID and the parent ID, so that those can be mapped to explain that relationship. You can also map out an order or a sequence field in the data list in the relational display model. I think there are some examples where it would be possible to create a data list for relational use through the ad hoc query builder, but most likely you're going to have created that data list using the SDK, where you've got a lot more control over exactly what you want to appear as fields in the data list to be able to leverage the power of the relational display mode. Tip number 5 is about leveraging attribute form extensions and configured actions. Just as a very quick refresher, attribute categories are the kind of custom fields that you can add to a variety of record types to extend your Blackbaud CRM solution. And when you create an attribute category, you automatically get the view forms and the add and edit functionality to be able to work with those attributes, but it tends to be separate to the record type that you've added the category to. So here we can see attributes sit in their own data list. That functionality will always be there. But to go to the next level, what you want to do is include those attribute categories in existing forms so that users don't need to take two distinct steps of first adding the record and then adding the attributes. So here's an example of what that looks like. We're adding a planned gift under legacies, and there's two display modes for attributes. When you're extending a form, it can either be as a standalone tab with all of the attributes that you choose to include, or they can be appended to the bottom of the first page or the main page of the form. Here's an example of an edit form in exactly the same way. It's showing the existing attribute data. It's worth noting that only attribute categories that are one per record can be used in this way. You can also leverage attribute categories directly in data lists or with actions using the attribute key. So in this example on revenue history, I have a attribute category called processor, and I'm able to add actions onto the data list to directly add that attribute onto that revenue record. And using a tip that'll come a little later, which is around adding defaults, you can really make those to be very, very effective and quick processes. To take advantage of attribute form extensions, this is done from the same area where you manage the attribute categories themselves. So there's a second tab on that attribute categories page. There you can add attribute form extensions. You'll need to add an extension for each form that you want to extend. So if you want to change both the add and edit form, you do both of those, and you can choose which of the attribute categories for that particular record type to include on that form. If you want to take advantage of actions that are directly adding, editing, or deleting attributes on a record type, the key thing is to use a calculated expression with the following structure that you can see on this slide. As we mentioned, these are only attribute form extensions are only available for one-to-one attributes. And here's the first of the bonus tips that I promised. Don't forget, if you are going to add actions, take advantage of the icons that exist so that the experience is consistent for your users and they know what they are doing. Going back to data lists for tip number 6, and that is to take advantage of the legend feature. Legend allows you to define particular formatting rules for rows in a data list that meet a particular set of conditions that you're able to define. Effectively, two parts to that configuration: the expression, which says the condition that the row has to meet, and then you've got some options around the display. You've got some basic ones that you can manipulate through bold, italics, and full color, but you've also got these predefined styles in the display style option. So here's a couple of useful expressions that could help in defining legend rules that might be relevant. So one's taking advantage of date, contains, or length. One thing to be aware of, that you can have multiple legend rules on a single data list, but if you do have multiple rules that a given row could meet, it will be the last rule that gets applied to that particular row. Effectively, it kind of works through each legend rule in turn, applying the logic of that rule, so the last one will take precedent. I mentioned that we'd be coming back to form defaults, and we've arrived. Form defaults are a really, really helpful way to save your users time, particularly when they're doing repetitive tasks. So in this example, we're in an event and we're adding somebody to the waiting list, and you'll see the journey is to do the constituent search, and then once we've found an appropriate search, it's going to go to the add interaction form, but it's going to apply a lot of defaults that are relevant in adding a waiting list item in this particular space. So you can see subcategory event, the event is populated, meaning that the only information that the user has to enter is the thing that is different for this particular addition. The default form configuration allows you to use fields from the data list or from the page, but it also allows you to use expressions, which opens up a lot of opportunities. Here we can see an example of a particularly complex data list of overdue installments. We've added actions with pledges to be able to create check-in calls and assign them to the relevant owner. So you can see that the summary has a variable aspect to it, which is the revenue ID. You'll also note between these two examples that the owner is different. So that's being calculated using an expression to decide who the appropriate owner is. Another way to do that would be to have multiple instances of the form with different defaults and control the visibility of which interaction add form you're showing in different scenarios. Field defaults are configured from the action properties, and on screen we've got some more useful expressions for when you might be working with defaults around if then or calling out a particular code table value. When you open it up, you'll see all of the possible data elements that you can leverage as part of that expression builder. Okay, so we are now halfway through the Page Designer tips and tricks. Tip number 8 is around enabling bulk record operations. So this is where you have data lists and you want to enable your users to take the same action for a set of records within that data list. As you can see on the screen, you get the little checkbox functionality, and you've got the option to take the same action for all of those all at once. A kind of no-code global change that still keeps that human decision-making element. This is done in the data list configuration with the record operation allow multi-select property. If you set that to true, you can enable this functionality. You also have the ability to add a specific prompt just to flag to users that they are about to take that action over potentially a large set of records. One thing to note is that this functionality is only available for record operations, i.e. things that are going to be run without needing to open a form for further action or data entry. So usually limited to things like deletion or making something historical, but via the SDK, you can also potentially create record operations that would go a little further, do a little bit more, and then enable that through multi-select. Tip number 9 is around surfacing external web content directly within your Blackbaud CRM instance. This is great at keeping users within the platform. It's often used for displaying BI content, so that might be through Power BI, Tableau, or your preferred reporting platform. The advantage of users being able to see it from within Blackbaud CRM is that if there is an issue or they recognize something that isn't right, they're already in the platform where they can correct that information and have it pull through correctly whenever the data is refreshed. Depending on what the content you're bringing through is, and particularly how it's shaped. You might find that this works best when you have a page with nothing else on it, that it's a page with just a web page section type to really give it the real estate. A particularly neat usage of this section type is by passing the context through to the web page as a URL parameter. So in this example, we've got a Power BI report, which is an overall engagement scorecard. That Power BI report has the data for all of the constituents that this might be relevant for. So it might be something that you only choose to have prospects in the semantic model in Power BI for, but you would need to pass it the context of the record that you're looking at in order to display anything useful. And you can do that through the URL parameter, which I'll show in a second through the config options. That doesn't have to be limited to constituents, though. You could apply the same logic if you were looking from within an event record or from within a designation. You could have a Power BI report that includes all designation data, but filters automatically when viewing from a particular designation record. So here's an example of that within an event where we've got an event report in Power BI and the context is being passed to Power BI. So when you click on this tab, it's showing that report, but for this particular event. You can also see that because this report is going to get used within a page that has a view form at the top and maybe not as much real estate available as the report we were looking at previously, it's been specifically designed to not be showing too much. So keeping it fairly simple with just two visualizations mean that that can fit in this area appropriately. So here we have the configuration instructions of how to take advantage of the external web page section type. It's added from within a new page section. A couple of things to be mindful of. There's a is scrollable property. You probably want that set to true. If you're embedding Power BI reports or anything where you want to take advantage of that context-based behavior that I was describing, you need to pass the URL at the point that is appropriate in the URL of the option that you're using. And the key bit here is the syntax for being able to access the data fields is that double @ sign. So that is effectively the kind of parameter indicator when you're working with a URL in the new page section. As you can see here, another reminder about screen dimensions. Depending on how much space you think you're going to need, if you go overkill with a massive Power BI report that looks great when you're designing it in Power BI desktop, and then when you bring it through into CRM, it only has a fraction of the screen, it's not going to look great. And another tip around using those URL parameters, you can hide the filter pane and content pane in Power BI by passing parameters in the URL. So we're starting to get into the more expert level tips here, not because they require an additional set of skills, but because they're a little bit more involved to set up to take kind of full advantage of them, but the effort is worth the reward. This is one of my favorites, and it's using post action to create a kind of workflow style experience. As always, a video speaks 1,000 words. So if we have a look at an example where we're adding an individual, so this task has been configured with a post action that takes us to a particular page with the context of the record that we've just created. So we've added this individual in, and it's taking us to this new page that has 3 tabs that mimic a kind of workflow style that we would be expecting the user to populate in additional fields in areas that aren't available out of the box for the constituent form. So solicit codes is a great example. We would ideally want that to be done at the point of constituent creation. So setting it up in this way is a great reminder for your end users to be thinking about these things when they're adding data into Blackbaud CRM. You could also use those post-action types on the last step to return the user to the standard constituent page. That Kelly had put together demonstrating options for using post-action types. Bonus points if you can spot the usage of some of the tips that we've already covered in this session. So the context is this is a volunteer offboarding workflow, stepping through things that you would need to do when offboarding a volunteer. You can see how for a process that happens frequently or a process that is particularly complex, the way this type of page designer usage could really help improve data quality and efficiency for your users. I mentioned that workflow style experience is just built using the page designer. Each one of those steps is just a tab named with a step to give it that flow feel. And then the post-action type is the kind of entry point into that experience. When it's done, you can also then action out and take the user back to where they started the journey from. Hopefully you recognize the usage of form defaults and instances and legend to help draw out those particularly key records. Last example, we saw how a page could be used to recreate a workflow style experience. In this example, we're going to see how linked pages can create a kind of drill down or drill through experience. So in our example, we've got a page that has a data list for a particular set of organizations, and one of the columns, which is also a hyperlink, takes you through to another page which is passing the page context through to look at the particular employees of the company that you clicked through from, that kind of drill down experience. For how to achieve that effect, you'll normally have an overview page that you're accessing with no context, and then the drill down page is the one that's being passed that context in order to control what's specifically appearing on the drill through page. This is another example where you need the GUID to be included in the data list for wherever you're going to pass through, but it kind of, if it's not the default row, then you need to include it, but it can be hidden. We also saw this example leveraging hyperlinking from tip 3. The tips that we've been looking at so far take advantage of the expression builder in Page Designer, particularly using section fields or page fields from the record that's being viewed as part of that select expression. The example where we had the dynamic summary that was bringing in the revenue ID into the summary is a great example of that. But this next tip is a reminder that there are also other data points available within that expression builder outside of just the particular record or context of what you're looking at on screen. A great example of that is the application user. So that's a data reference that you can pick up as part of the expression builder and use to build things like a call list that is specific to the logged in user. So this is a little different to the fundraiser tab, which is context driven by the fundraiser record that you're looking at. And for the fundraiser tab, anyone who looks at that fundraiser would see the context of that particular record. Whereas this example, the My Call list, because it's using the application user, this is going to appear different for every user. Nobody would be able to see what another user is seeing without taking advantage of the run as function which administrators have. More complex implementation of this concept is stepping up to the team level. So here you can see a team workspace being demoed. So you'd be seeing actions related to members within your team. Even that kind of behavior. As mentioned, current app user ID is available in the context expressions. It's under the globals section. The second example we looked through uses the ID mapper field on the configuration screen, which allows you to dive into the constituent record associated with the app user. So in that scenario, we may have had a constituent attribute on the constituent record associated with the app user that outlined which team that constituent was a part of, and therefore that app user was a part of, and then use that to control what appears on the page for that particular user. To make all of that work, you have to make sure that you've got that context all the way through from the task to the page, and also on the data lists that appear on that page that you want that context to apply to. But it is possible to add non-contextual data lists onto that page. So you can have a kind of a mixed combination on that dashboard. And now tip number 13. I would guess that many of you have probably jumped in at some point to control the visibility of an element in Blackbaud CRM. Obviously, you can just change true to false and that thing disappears, but using Expression Builder, you can support a much more kind of nuanced set of logic. Again, here you can leverage the standard fields related to the page or the data list, but you can also go beyond that. So let's have a look at a couple of examples here. This one is controlling the visibility of a nominations tab based on whether the event is a category of awards and recognition or not. This example is looking at the percent of capacity field that exists on events. So it's controlling the visibility of a waiting list tab, which will appear once the event reaches full capacity so that users can then start adding constituents into that waiting list. Just tabs where the ability to control visibility is really useful. This example is looking at opportunities on prospect plan, and it's applying a visibility expression that says if the opportunity count field, which is a field on the prospect plan, is less than 1, then the add opportunity button should be visible. If not, it won't appear. This has the effect of locking or limiting prospect plans to one opportunity, so that it's one opportunity per prospect plan. This is something that a lot of Blackbaud CRM customers do, so that the stage kind of moves management functionality associated with the plan by extension also becomes associated with the opportunity. An important thing to flag here when you're working in page properties, there's a field called page expression forms. If you click into that on an out of the box example, you will see one, potentially more view forms that have been added in for that particular page properties. The fields that are on those view forms are available to you within the expression builder when you're working in those page properties. So you can add page expression forms as needed. There's often you'll be able to achieve what you need by just adding one of the default expression forms for that record type. But if you need to, you can also create a new view form using the SDK and then add that in through the page expression section. Also, here's another couple of examples of useful expressions that might be relevant for controlling visibility. These are particularly around picking out parts of a string. So examples where this might be relevant: if your organization has the concept of membership groups or networks, and you have a naming convention that means that that will always be in the name of the record, you could, for example, have a tab that appears based on whether the word group or network appears in the name of the parent record that you're viewing. 14 is to remember to use all of the tools at your disposal to give your users as much context as they need when they're working through the system. So you've got a lot of page properties that you can define to give users that information and create a seamless experience. We'll have a look at how those are configured. So action groups. From the properties dialog will appear as items in that left nav taskbar. Image is the image. Context link is what appears right at the top. Caption is the main thing that you'd normally see. A summary section. This is really useful. It takes a view form. So if you wanted to go ahead and design a particular view form in the SDK, that gives you some options to produce some really intuitive user experiences. As always, don't forget to use consistent image icons, and a bonus tip, just again, calling back as much as we can to useful things in the expression builder. Here's some examples of how to apply casing. Stop at Page Designer. As a bonus, here's some additional tips that apply across the Blackbaud CRM. Read all of these out. You can pause and read them here. They're all fairly self-explanatory, I hope. Here we have it, tips and tricks for Page Designer and bonus Blackbaud CRM in general. Thanks so much if you've come all the way through to the end here. Here's a couple of additional resources to take your Page Designer usage to the next level. You've got the Page Designer Guide, which is incredibly in-depth. You've got the Blackbaud CRM community, where if you've got questions, you can get support from other Blackbaud CRM customers. And then finally, if you wanted to explore training options from Blackbaud, contact your account executive or customer success manager for more information. Again, and apologies that we were unable to offer this session live. I'm exploring whether we can do a kind of a dedicated Q&A session, but in absence of that, if you do have any particular questions on the content that we've covered, do email through on the email address on screen. Thanks again. Bye.